I proclaim with all the power that is in me that the Inside Out podcast is the only true and living podcast on the face of the whole earth, with which I, Bruce Reginald McConkie, am well pleased, speaking under the podcast collectively as well as individually.
And we are live for the first time in the new year. We've actually missed the last couple of weeks, and we apologize for that, although I don't apologize all that much because we had my whole family here. And so it was a good time. We hope you had a wonderful holiday season. Ian, you had a wonderful holiday season, did you not?
We had a great time. We were planning of going away to Seattle to see the Space Needle. They have this big firework display in Seattle with the drones. It's quite impressive, actually. But because we had family coming to stay, we thought we'd stay local. It was a wonderful time, just family, just doing nothing, sitting around in the house in your pajamas all day was quite fun. Sometimes doing nothing is the best thing. So we had a great time. So your time equally good?
Equally good. We once did a Christmas in Seattle. My wife's from Port Angeles, Washington. And we went to where, I don't even know the name of the stadium, but it's where the Mariners play. And they had this huge Christmas light thing there. And that was one of my very favorite Christmas times we ever had. But we had a wonderful time. My two oldest daughters, my oldest is a doctor in Chicago, and she wasn't able to come home for Christmas, but she was here as of the 29th. And then my other daughter, she just left last night, and she is getting her doctorate at the University of Southern California. So it was really fun to have them in town. And my three sons live in town, and I've got twin boys that are graduating from BYU in May. So anyway, life is good and all is well. And we've got some fun little comments here. SLC Vinyl, what's up? Glad you're here. Clayton says, Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year, everybody.
State of Mind says, good to see you, fellows. And Clayton says he likes the new glasses. Thank you, Clayton. I got them actually at the end of the year, so because we had to spend our health savings account money. So I got a new pair of glasses. My kids make fun of me because they have transition lenses. Do you have transition lenses on any of your glasses, Ian?
Are they the same as progressive lenses?
No, progressives are, so you have reading glasses at the bottom and the prescription at the top.
What transition?
When you go out in the sun, they become sunglasses. They get dark.
Oh, I didn't know that. Right. Okay.
My kids think that makes me a very old person. So I don't know. I enjoy having that, and it's kind of a nice thing. But it was also an eventful. Oh yeah, Clayton has transitions. He says I have transitions, and I am under 40. I get hell for it. Loving it here in Houston. The high is 82, warmest winter ever. It's been ridiculously warm in Utah. We had one day of snow, and it melted by the afternoon.
Right.
It's been raining the last couple of days, but no snow. I got this cool snowblower last Christmas, and I haven't used it once this year.
Right.
You getting any snow up there in Canada?
Great question. I'm glad you mentioned this because we've been here, 20 years almost. We had 2 years in Calgary, which is brutal there, by the way. It gets down to regular minus 20, minus 30. No exaggeration. It's not as cold there. We moved from Calgary to interior BC. And over the last few years, we've had fairly mild winters, but usually still quite a bit of snow, and it drops to minus 10, minus 15. But this winter, Jim, to date, we've had, which is absolutely weird, frankly, we've had +7, +8 degrees in the interior of British Columbia, which is unheard of. Usually, December, January is usually snowed out. We have usually ice and snow. This is Canada, right? And we've had very little or no snow. Even today, it was like 6, 7 degrees. And I don't mind that because I don't like driving on ice or snow. As I get older, I get a little bit jittery, a little bit nervous with the driving conditions. but from an environmental scientist, it's one of my hats that I wear. There's a lot of concern over climate change and how it's impacting, impacting the world. So we've had the mildest winter so far in this part of the world. I think in some cases since records began.
Well, we could do a whole podcast on that, but I think then we'd probably bore everybody to death if we're a podcast about the weather. Although, comment from SLC Vinyl, I wish we had more snow. Since I moved to Bountiful in 2012, it's felt like we've just watched the lake dry up. Yeah, and that's a big deal here, is the Great Salt Lake is in serious trouble, and that would turn, if it were to completely disappear, and it's already in the process of disappearing, it would turn the Salt Lake Valley into a wasteland, because you have all these toxic chemicals and toxic gases that would be released.
And it's interesting. And did you know, by the way, and you probably do know this, US is in conversation with the Canadian government, has been for a while. Conversations have intensified recently for a whole different bunch of reasons about shipping. We've got a lot of fresh water in Canada, lakes, thousands of lakes. We are the highest on the freshwater index in the world. Our water is very clean, very pristine. And they're talking about piping water down into Arizona and down into Nevada and down into Las Vegas, where our friend Elder Meacham lives down there. So I think that's probably likely to happen. We may end up shipping piping water into the US because we have no shortage of clean, fresh drinking water. So,
well, when Donald Trump takes over Canada, then that will make it a whole lot easier.
He's made moves recently in the last 24 hours, 40 hours. He's made some references about taking over Greenland and Canada. In the past he kind of would laugh when he made these comments, but now you're like, Canada could not hold up to America, US in terms of military or economically. We Canadians are not like that. They're not up for a fight. Some of them maybe, but it would be an easy takeover, frankly, for the US to take over Canada. The Canadians wouldn't like it, but
Americans shouldn't like it.
Right, some Americans wouldn't like it either.
This is driving me nuts. The whole Venezuela thing. Again, the idea that it's appropriate for an American president to go and kidnap a world leader that we don't like and offer absolutely no legal justification for it. I mean, a lot of people have compared this to Manuel Noriega and Panama. There was a veneer of legality to that, and Congress had been consulted, and Trump just said, "Oh, we want the oil, so we're going to go in and we're going to kidnap this guy." And today on Twitter, I posted just how we're live streaming on January 6th, and this is the 5th anniversary of Donald Trump's attempt to overthrow the American government. And when I posted that, and most of the pushback I got came from members of the church, it's astonishing to me how many people can look at that and say it didn't happen. And that's exactly what they're saying. There wasn't a riot. It was just a peaceful protest, or it was a Democratic setup, it's just like we all watched it. The footage is all there. We all saw it happen. And when it happened, even the Republicans at the time said, this man is responsible. Donald Trump is responsible for this. And 5 years of an alternate reality being pushed by a fundamentally dishonest president who does not know the difference between a lie and the truth has eroded the integrity of so many people that they look at January 6th and tell us that the sun isn't shining when it is. They tell us the sky is green when the sky is blue. And so much of that comes from members of the church. And so much of the bitter, vitriolic pushback I get online comes from fellow church members who insist that this is just because I'm a progmo and I'm this flaming leftist and liberal, despite the fact that I am still the same Reagan conservative I was before I left the Republican Party. It's just astounding to me. But we've talked about that kind of stuff over and over and over again. So maybe it might be appropriate to talk about what we were talking about. We were going to talk about, which was the fact that there is now a vacancy in the quorum of the 12. We talked about Elder Holland's funeral in our most recent podcast with Greg Prince. Can I announce the Greg Prince news, do you think?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Ladies and gentlemen, listening to this podcast, you are hearing it here first. Greg Prince will be joining us next week on our live stream. So you will get an opportunity to give your comments to Greg Prince, and he will respond to them. We almost got him on today, but then he went, maybe we wait another week. But we're just thrilled. Greg Prince will join us for our next live stream. So please let everybody know, and please come on. So, I've got somebody telling me I have TDS. Let's see. Here we go. So SLC vinyl, January 6th denial, almost as bad as the flat earth. I was a missionary at the time, and I basically saw the whole thing. Everybody saw the whole thing. Okay, this guy, I don't know who you are, Starry Skies 5499, but when you pathologize decency, you lose me completely. I mean, you don't have an actual argument to push back. You just say that I'm diseased because I recognize that what happened on January 6, 2021, was an atrocity. It had nothing to do with partisanship. It had nothing to do with derangement. And it just makes me ill to see somebody just come and do that. So, Starry, maybe find another podcast. If you want to come here and just be obnoxious, you're going to be completely ignored.
I just want to jump in and say something here, Jim, at this point. So, Inside Out is not a political podcast, right? There's a relationship between the church and religion, the church and politics, of course. There's a relationship between religion and politics, of course. Politics affects everybody's lives, whether you like it or not. There's so many different views, opinions, and obviously that's normal, that's natural. Our podcast is at least trying to be balanced in terms of our political views, understand the relationship between politics and the church and religion, but fundamentally, at least trying to encourage the right thing to do in the arena of political life, whether it's Republican or Democrats, in the UK, Labour, Conservative, Liberal, Reform, etc. There's other parties. I can only speak for myself. Jim can express his opinion on this, but I'm interested in intelligent politics, thoughtful politics, balanced politics, politics that are going to help people's lives, earn a living, follow the law, contribute to society, no extremism, and just fundamentally doing the right thing and having an integrity. And if that's a Democrat or a Republican or a Labour or a Conservative, it really comes down to that individual, and if the policy is fair and intelligent, and it comes down to basic right and wrong. And so going back to the vacancy, Jim, that you were talking about. So we talked about Greg Prince. He's coming on next week, which, by the way, Greg Prince is one of the most extraordinary people I've ever met. I've not met him in person. Jim has. I have utmost respect for Greg. I wish they'd call him as a general authority. I think it would be a fantastic addition to the senior leadership. And before you get into the Elder Holland and the vacancy there, Jim, I think it's appropriate to share that tomorrow we have another most extraordinary individual that we have been able to convince to come back onto the podcast, somebody that we have utmost respect for, and that is Richard Bushman. So Jim, Richard and I are meeting tomorrow on video, and we're going to have probably a very different type of conversation than perhaps we've ever had with Richard Bushman. We'll see where that goes. So these are people who we have utmost respect for because they have this balanced view of things, and we're so excited. Anyway, Jim, back to you with your the apostle. Elder Holland sadly passed away. We have a vacancy. Do you want to talk about President Holland, Elder Holland? Because I think
Sure.
you met him, and I've met him a few times.
Just want to go through these comments very quickly. We've talked. I just liked these guys come on and participate, and so I want to share these. The level of willful delusion is astounding. It's like people I think he means can't be bothered to see if they correctly understand serious events happening right now in this country. Clayton says Trump just declares emergencies and dictates policy, or he'll use the Iraq war authorization to declare anyone he doesn't like a terrorist. Dems winning the House doesn't even really matter. That scares me, but I think you're right. Live Greg Prince, yes, indeed. No way we have our first troll. Everybody clap. Thank you, SLC Vinyl. I'm not going to tolerate trolls on here, just so you know. My mom had a stroke on January 6, 2021. I will never forgive Trump for the physical harm he caused my mother. She's never been the same.
Very sorry, Clayton.
Very sorry. Any topics for the live stream with Greg?
Yes. Well, Greg's written this amazing document called A Roadmap for Improving Mormonism. And we've had Greg on, 13, 14 times now. And we've got into that document, done some deep dives. We've got another 3 or 4 topics that are going to, I think, complete that review of the document. They're extraordinary conversations. I think Greg will want to talk about that. So any questions you've got about this significant document that I hope the leadership of the church has got a copy of, because it really does a fantastic job, actually, identifying very specific areas in the church where the church can improve and actually get better, from somebody like Greg, who's very thoughtful, very intelligent. And this document, I hope that the brethren have got a copy of. So we've been reviewing that with Greg over a series of podcasts, which you can go on and go back into the podcast history and listen to all of those if you have the time. But Greg Prince is a very special individual, and he's very wise and very thoughtful. And so we're looking forward to having him on, and no doubt our listeners, Jim, will have lots of questions. They can ask him live, let him do most of the talking. We'll kind of guide it as we go forward. But I think people will really enjoy this opportunity they've got to ask Greg directly questions that they've been thinking about for a while. So,
yep, absolutely. So Clayton applauds. He says, where do you get all these connections? It's amazing the guests y'all get. Guys, Ian Wilkes is the man that makes this happen, just so you know. I get a call from Ian, and he's like, well, what would you think if we had Richard Bushman on? And I said, well, I think I know somebody who knows him. And Ian says, well, I'm in communication with him, and he's going to be coming on. That was the first time. And this time, I mean, Richard Bushman he's 95, 96 years old.
Yeah.
I mean, he mentally, he is still there, but when you get to be 95, 96 years old, you use your time wisely because you don't have a whole lot of it to waste at that point. And the fact that he's willing to come back and wants to talk to us, I think is just thrilling. And again, that was Ian Wilkes that made that happen. So we have now spent 18 minutes talking about everything except what we said we were going to talk about. And that's the vacancy in the 12. And I talked a little bit about this at the in our podcast with Greg Prince that was published on Saturday. But want to reemphasize. So I attended Elder Holland's funeral as a member of the Tabernacle Choir. And it was really remarkable because it was in the tabernacle. And usually when you are gathered with general authorities, it's a general conference, and it's in the conference center, which is this cavernous, huge building compared to the tabernacle, which really isn't that big. I think it seats about 1,500 people, something like that. And the general authorities are right up there next to the choir loft when you're in the tabernacle. So I was about 20 feet away from President Uchtdorf. We can call him President Uchtdorf again because he's now the president of the Quorum of the 12. President Uchtdorf and David Bednar. I had a just clear line of sight to them, and watched as President Eyring was wheeled into the tabernacle. And I don't know what happened, but there wasn't a lot of room, and I think he kind of got stuck. They couldn't figure out a way to get the wheelchair through. And so he stood up, and he walked to his chair a few feet. And folks, I love Henry Eyring. He went to school with my father. There's a really funny picture of him playing Jerry Lewis, and my father's playing Dean Martin when they're like 16 years old. Henry Eyring spoke at my father's funeral. He called my father's book about the Book of Mormon the greatest defense of the Book of Mormon that has ever been written. So I am just a huge fan. He is so frail. He is so frail, and it almost brought me to tears to see him struggle to get to his seat. Now, President Oaks is doing a little better than that, but not markedly better than that. Both of these men are very frail and very weak, and I mean physically weak. And I think that is actually tempering President Oaks's regular demeanor. You know, when President Oaks gets up at a pulpit, usually you expect this sort of legalistic and bombastic, to some degree, delivery. And every time I've seen him speak, and I've seen him speak live every time he has spoken publicly since he's been president of the church. The one exception is President Nelson's funeral. I was at President Nelson's memorial service, which is the first time he spoke. And then I saw him speak live in conference. And then I saw him here at Elder Holland's funeral. The humility in President Oaks's demeanor is remarkable, and a remarkable shift, I think, from the regular expectation of him. And I'm wondering if this is a man who knows that he doesn't have a lot of time as president of the church, and is really feeling the weight of that calling and really humbled by it in a way that I find remarkable and somewhat inspiring. So I think, however, that Dieter F. Uchtdorf is positioned, I think, to lead the church, and then that's likely to happen sooner rather than later. In fact, our friend Nemo the Mormon published his 5 predictions for 2026, and one of them was that Dieter F. Uchtdorf will become president of the church this year. I think it's within the realm of possibility. I think there's probably better than a 50-50 chance that that's the case. So I don't know if that's disrespectful to talk about people passing, but when you're dealing with men who are into their 90s, well into their 90s, and in very frail health, I don't see any way to avoid that kind of a subject. So the funeral, you had 3 speakers, all of whom were Elder Holland's children. And the third speaker, of course, is someone that Ian knows better than I do, but I am well acquainted with Matthew S. Holland, I'm sorry. Jeffrey R. Holland, Matthew S. Holland. Matt Holland served a mission with us. He was the AP when I came out as a greenie, so I was always very intimidated by him. But Ian, you actually interacted with him quite a bit, did you not?
I did. I got to know him early on in the mission. So Elder Jacobs and I were serving in Dunfermline, and we had a bit of a breakthrough. We had an afternoon of I think it was Sunday. It was a Sunday afternoon. We were studying, and we had a bit of an epiphany or some inspiration around what the mission was looking for, to a missing thing or something, to achieve the number of baptisms. Each month had gone through a series of key focus areas like repentance and obedience, and trying to figure out a way how to baptize more than 9 people a month, Jim, frankly, when I came out, right? And Jacobs and I, and he led this, credit to him, a study around the principle of charity, okay? And we had this spiritual experience in the afternoon on Sunday, and we made all these notes. And we then called Elder Holland, who was the assistant at the time. Elder Sampson was the senior. Elder Holland was junior AP. And we shared this experience with Elder Holland. This is back in before you came out. This was back in May '87. You came out in September '87. I was in Dunfermline at the time, and so we had this conversation. And Elder Holland and Sampson took this information that we found, that we felt inspired to share, to President Dunn. It was Dunn. So this is before Banks replaced him in July. And Dunn said, that's it. That's the missing ingredient, is charity. So they all came over to our flat. They drove up the next day with Elder Holland, Elder Sampson, and President Dunn to Dunfermline. And they met us at church, and we kind of went through all of our notes and material. And they said, that's it. This is it. And so for that next month, including in the newsletter, in the mission, this Jacobs led study that we'd embarked on that afternoon became the focus. And they felt that by loving people, which I think is kind of obvious to me, I don't know why it took them months, to figure this out. It's kind of obvious, just love people into the gospel, right? That was the thing that was focused on. That was the seventh and the final chapter in that series of months that they were trying to pray about, to find out how to get more people to join the church. And Elder Holland and I worked very closely on this. And I've got a letter from him, a personal letter, which I've got in my, I should share it. He said, Elder Wilkes, thank you for your work. Elder Jacobs, he said, Elder Wilkes, if you ever come to Salt Lake, I'm going to buy you a slush puppy? Is that?
Slush puppy?
What's that? A drink, a cold drink.
Sure.
In the UK, right. It's like a slush puppy. It's like a UK, it's called it's a smoothie. It's a smoothie, basically, some kind of ice drink or something like that. Anyway, I've got this personal letter from Matt. But anyway, we became friends. I tracted with him a couple of times in Edinburgh. Great missionary. I've got photographs of him doing some extraordinary work, going right back to his mission. I've got him in a picture with Elder Haight. If you remember him, President Haight, one of the apostles. Yeah. I gave the opening prayer at that Dunn Banks conference. Matt gave the other prayer, I think it was. We've got the agenda there. But anyway, it's a long story. But Matt was one of the finest missionaries that ever to serve in the SCM. And I got to know his dad a little bit. Did I get to know him? That's probably a bit of a stretch. I met his dad, I had a conversation with him a few times. And with respect to Elder Holland, and he was a great orator, one of the finest orators of the church had in the last 100 years by far. Very intelligent man, a wonderful man in many ways. I didn't get along with him so well as I did with Matt. I had a couple of conversations that were not, for me at least, not very positive. But I did see his positive influence on lots of other people. As you know, he was the church's lead for the Europe West area, based in Solihull in England, and he was what was the position there? He was the Area 70.
Area Authority 70, or
Area Authority 70. Maybe that's not the right title. The most senior general authority in Western Europe, based in England, and his interactions with some of the saints in the UK were mixed. There were times he didn't communicate as well as he could have or should have, frankly, but there were times he did. And so, I know that he influenced a lot of people's lives for the good, and I believe that. But I have a my relationship with Matt is quite different than my relationship with his dad, and that's fine. I think you're always going to get general authorities that somebody you get along with, others you don't. Some people you gel with, some people you don't, right?
Well, I don't know if I've told this story. The first time I saw Matt Holland after my mission was at Aspen Grove Family Camp up at BYU. And I went and said hello to him, and he goes, Jim, wow, you've really filled out. And I was like, thanks. Oh, but in a good way, he said. And I'm like, yeah, sure. But then when I ran for Congress, I went and met with him in his office when he was the president of Utah Valley University, and had a long productive conversation with him. And I've gotten to know him since then because Matt Holland is directly, the way I understand it is that Matt Holland and Aaron Sherinian reports directly to Matt Holland. He's his contact with church leadership. And they were in Los Angeles together, Matt Holland and Aaron Sherinian. And they were meeting with a friend of mine who is not a member of the church. And I'm not sure if I should say his name or not. But I grew up with him in Southern California. And he was he's Jewish. Has absolutely no connection to the church. And I got this text of this friend of mine sitting with Aaron Sherinian in a picture that was taken by Matt Holland. And they both were talking to him. And he said, I only knew one Mormon growing up. And I think his dad was kind of a big deal. Like his dad was kind of a senator or something. And they both said to him, you know Jim Bennett? And he said, no, I know Jimmy Bennett. Because I'd known this guy since I was Jimmy Bennett. So it's we start talking about Matt Holland, and the reason I bring that up is that Matt Holland gave a really masterful talk at his father's funeral. It was just a lovely, lovely talk. And I really got the sense that this is probably somebody who is going to end up in the 12 himself at some point. And I also, maybe this is bad to say, but I also got the sense that he sees himself as somebody that may end up in the 12 at some point. I think it would be too sort of precious, is the word I'm using, for him to be called now. But I was talking to somebody who said he's very likely a candidate to be in the presidency of the 70. Which is where a good number of the apostles who have been called in recent years have come from. They've either come from the presidency of the 70, or they've come from the presiding bishopric. Patrick Kieran, who was in my ward for years, was in the presidency of the 70 when he was called. Gerard Cosset, who I'm sure I'm mispronouncing the name, who was just called recently, was the presiding bishop. So that if that pattern holds, our next apostle is, oh crud, I'm trying to remember his name. And I thought, you have a list, Ian.
I do. I've made some bold predictions.
The first person on your list, I think, is the next apostle. Because he's in the presidency of the 70. It's a Dean Dubin, is that right?
Yeah, I'll come to that in a second. In regards to Matt Holland, I think, no surprise. I think he's got the calling partly, I think, because of his dad, right? This is obviously, as a Holland, right? But that aside, is a great leader. He won't get called anything serious yet because he's kind of new, I don't think. And also the optics wouldn't look good. President Holland, Elder Holland, who's passed away, I think will be seen, depending who you speak to, in a mixed view. We talked with Greg Prince about the musket fire talk. And I think there's certain things that Elder Holland did and said that will maybe overshadow some of the good things that he did and said. He made some great talks, wonderful spiritual, emotional talks, but he also gave some talks that I think in hindsight he wish he hadn't. We talked about that on the podcast last time with Greg. Going forward, in terms of potential candidate replacements, and I've made these predictions here. I think, and we've said this before with Greg and you and other people on the podcasts, this is another opportunity, and there'll be a few more, as some of the apostles leave us over the next, how long that will take. This is an opportunity for the church to become not just international, because we have a number of international people in the apostleship right now, but for it to reflect the different cultures and ethnicity and races that are in the world. So my bold prediction going forward, first in this order, is Elder Edward Dubé. Dubé.
Yeah.
native of Zimbabwe. Elder Dubwe is a prominent candidate, I think. He currently serves in the presidency of the 70, so he's got some credentials there, which is the third highest general authority level in the church. He served as general authority for over a decade and has been noted as a potential wildcard pick for the apostle position. The other one is Elder Ahmed S. Corbett, an American from the United States. Elder Corbett serves as general authority 70, has significant public speaking roles, and has been mentioned in various discussions as a potential future apostle. Elder Peter M. Johnson, I think we spoke at the last conference. I talked about him before. He became the first African-American general authority, 17, 2019. His prior service included various local leadership positions. Is also considered a potential candidate. And the other one I've got here, the Black Apostle, is Elder Joseph W. Sitati, a Kenyan, also served as a general authority 70, is another example of an international individual who could potentially fill an apostle level role. So I think, you've mentioned Nemo, the Mormon. I think Elder Oaks is going to be around for a bit longer than what you think. That's my prediction. President Banks, our mission president, said, you may be around when he said this. He told the missionaries in Scotland, watch Elder Oaks. He's going to be amazing apostle. This judge, Utah court judge, intelligent guy. I've been interviewed by President Oaks. I've received a little bit of training from him. Spent the afternoon with him. Can't say I know him obviously personally, but had a conversation with him and very impressed by him. Very intelligent man. I think President Oaks has yet to make a significant mark on the church and the world before he passes away. I still hold out that will happen. I really do. Anyway, there's some of the black candidates that are potential candidates for the apostleship, and I think it would be strategic and wise and good and appropriate and kind and thoughtful and all the things that you can think of, all the good reasons you can think of, to call a black apostle into the leadership. I think that would send a message that the world is, that the church is not just international, but also respects these different cultures and ethnics and ethnicity rather, and people of color. And I think it would show a level of maturity, because one of the big things that still plagues the church, aside from polygamy, which is the big one, I think, is the church's history on race, which is terrible. It's just terrible. The things that some of the past leaders have said about black people is disgusting. It's grotesque. It's awful. And anything that the church can do to, not just in word, but in deed, physically remove itself and yes, apologize for those past hurtful, cruel, awful comments that it made, and show an act of some kind of action to say, look, we're grown up, we're mature, we made mistakes, we said things that were wrong, we disavow with that was wrong. It has said it rejects racism in any form. Well, let's put your money where the mouth is. Let's call a black apostle. Let's make the church multicultural in the leadership as well as multinational. We've probably got a whole bunch of comments that we're behind on here, Jim.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Do you want to read some of them here?
Sure. Well, I've been doing some of the talking. You go ahead. You go ahead.
Okay. SLC Vinyl talked about it. Sort of reminds me of President Benson, how he seemed to settle down a ton when he became the prophet. Yes and no. A part of President Benson's settling down had to do with the fact that he really was sort of lapsing into dementia very early on. And I don't see any sign that President Oaks is in any way mentally incapacitated. President Benson spent an awful lot of time being slapped down by his fellow general authorities, including by my great-grandfather. David O. McKay and Ezra Taft Benson went at it a number of times. And if you read Benjamin Park's book, American Zion, which I think is one of the best, if not the best, short histories of the church that has ever been written. He talks about how President Benson, at one point in 1968, was asked to run as the vice presidential candidate with George Wallace, the governor of Alabama, the racist, segregationist governor of Alabama, and run as the vice president on a third-party ticket, and thought that he'd be able to do that with President McKay's approval without too much difficulty, because President McKay by that point was 90. He was exactly the same age that Dallin Oaks is now. He's 93 years old, but very frail. And he passed away. They didn't diagnose him as having Parkinson's disease, but my grandfather, David L. McKay, had very pronounced Parkinson's disease, and everybody said that it was very much like his father's. So he was essentially incapacitated, but was able to sort of come out of that and say, you cannot do this, and slap him down and say, you can't do this. This is not appropriate for you to do. And I mean, Benson ran into so much opposition from so many people because he was so overtly political that by the time he became president of the church, that had sort of been pounded out of him in a way that it's different from President Oaks, because President Oaks, one of the reasons, Ian, I think I may disagree with you that we're going to see some massive kind of mark that President Oaks is going to make on the church as president of the church, is that I think that he and Russell Nelson were joined at the hip, and that every mark he wanted to make on the church, he made on the church while he was in the first presidency with President Nelson. I may be wrong. It'll be interesting to see. But, when President Nelson became president of the church, he hit the ground running. We couldn't say Mormon anymore right out of the gate. Just big, massive reforms came. 2-hour church came very quickly. And the end of home teaching came very quickly. And just a lot of big, large shifts. And the whole flood of new temples came very quickly. And President Oaks has been very, we've seen that the missionary age for women has gone down, but that's pretty much it in terms of, we haven't, there doesn't seem to have been, when President Nelson said, Wendy Nelson said that when President Nelson became president of the church, there were a lot of things he wanted to do, and now he's been unleashed. I don't feel like Dallin Oaks has been leashed. And so he doesn't necessarily feel like he needs to be unleashed. Peter Higgs says the presidency looks more like an aged nursing home than a leadership group.
We talk about gerontocracy with Greg Prince quite a bit. I just want to push back a little bit on the Oaks thing. There may be been joined at the hip on quite a few things, but look what Oaks did in regards to the temple. Nelson had gone too fast, too aggressive on temples, right? Announcing temples left, right, and center, some that might not even ever be built, right? And what did Oaks do? Quickly, immediately out the gate, he kind of said, hey, we kind of pausing. I think that was the word, right? We're pausing. I don't think Nelson and Oaks were joined at the hip on the temple. I think that was Nelson's personal fetish with temples, right? He talked about this decades before, temples, and about the Mormon name, which was ridiculous, right? You can't use the word Mormon. I've never heard something so ridiculous in my life, frankly. I think that's gone now, isn't it? I think people are okay about using the word Mormon. I'm not seeing a problem there. But Nelson's personal thing was temples. I don't think Oaks was fully on board in that at all. And that's why he did what he did. His first talk is about families, right? Proclamation to the world, reiterating the traditional conventional family. That was a key message that came out. I don't think he's going to change position on LGBTQ issues, frankly, but he didn't agree with Nelson on the rate of temple announcements, and he said we're pausing. So, yeah, some of it I agree with. Others, I think they were not joined at the hip. What other comments do we have, Jim?
We have many others. So Apostate of Mind 42, as someone on the outside, Uchtdorf as president is incredibly hopeful for needed and meaningful change.
I agree.
I can imagine there are literally thousands in the church who are praying for Oakes to go so Uchtdorf can move up. Unfortunately, prayers won't cut it alone.
No,
I am not one of those.
For a while. Go ahead.
So SLC Vinyl thinks that your slush puppy was a Slurpee.
Where did I get slush puppy from? Is that a British thing? I think it might be a British thing. That might be
Slurpee. American. That's a you get those in 7-Eleven. Do they have 7-Elevens in Canada?
Yeah, we do. I think Matt was using the British term. So I think it was a slush drink, Slurpee. He was using it was in Britain. Remember, this is in the UK, speaking UK language. Slurpee, it meant Slurpee. I know what a Slurpee is, yeah.
All right. So
what's that comment about Oak spending billions? I quite like some of the very pointed comments. I want to respond to those if we can. Okay.
Well, Clayton asks, if when Uchtdorf becomes president of the church, do you think that women will get the priesthood? What about more LGBT inclusion? I could be terribly wrong, but I think Uchtdorf would be dynamic.
I don't think they'll get the priesthood. I think that is, it'd be great if they did. Women need to have the same authority as a man, and frankly would do easily as good a job, and in some cases better. Remember, I've said, Jim, a few times, one of my best counselors as a bishop and branch president, well, being a bishop, was my Relief Society president. I got some of the best counsel from the sisters than I ever did from some of the brethren. I think the LGBTQ inclusion, yes, I think Uchtdorf will usher in a new era of inclusion and kindness and respect. I don't think, Clayton, you're wrong. I think that will happen. Women getting the priesthood, I wish that was going to happen. I have no problem with that. I think we're a couple of decades away from that. You know, the church moves at a snail's pace. I think we're going to see the rate of change and the pace of change increase with Uchtdorf than we are with previous leaders. I have great hopes for Uchtdorf. I agree with you.
I don't know that he can live up to as many expectations as I think people have of him. And I had a friend who actually met with him and talked about and raised the issue of women and was actually very disappointed by how non-progressive Dieter Uchtdorf was on that specific issue. But again, who knows? We'll see what happens. The challenge with Uchtdorf as president is that Bednar will be president of the 12. I don't think that's a big challenge. Just because the president of the 12, the president of the church drives the bus. And when Elder Holland gave the musket fire talk, he did so under instruction. I don't know if he was president of the 12 by then. I think Elder Ballard was still president of the 12 at that point. But being a senior apostle and even president of the 12, you can get overridden in a heartbeat by the first presidency. Boyd K. Packer learned that the hard way in 2010 when his talk was essentially rewritten. That was the famous talk where he said, "Why would your heavenly Father make anyone gay?" And where he tried to canonize the proclamation on the family, and was slapped down by the first presidency. He was the president of the Quorum of the 12. He'd been, if there was any powerful member of the quorum, it was Boyd Packer, and yet there you have the first presidency able to slap him down. Do you see that being an issue with Bednar as president of the 12, Ian?
No, I with respect to Bednar, I've listened to some of his talks. Some of his comments are quite odd, frankly. I see him as a lightweight. He's not a barrier at all. I think, maybe we're putting too much on Uchtdorf, but I think he still will do some great things. And I think he'll move the church into, if this is his legacy, what I'm going to say here right now, if Uchtdorf can move the church collectively into a more inclusive, kinder, less judgmental kind of culture, and be, because the scriptures teach all are alike unto God, right? All the children of God, okay? If we could actually live it in practice and be more kinder and tolerant to others, whoever they are, right? Regardless of their situation or circumstances or preferences, And I think Uchtdorf will shift the church in the right direction faster than earlier leaders have done in the past. I think that's fair. I think that's all we can expect. We'll see.
We'll see. We'll see what happens. Those who have sidelined Uchtdorf in recent years are either gone or soon will be. I think dynamic change is inevitable. I hope his will is still strong for it. I think you're right in the sense that dynamic change is inevitable because we really don't have any choice. That's the thing I keep coming back to. This idea that we can sort of go back to Bruce R. McConkie 1964 sort of Mormonism. It's just not real. It's just not going to happen. And we don't have any choice but to go forward or just sort of drift off into irrelevance. Somebody pointed out it was Elder Dubé. Dubé. So, howdy. How are you?
Howdy.
If you go back and listen to Oakes about his feelings with the priesthood ban was lifted, I think he is the man to call a black apostle.
I think that's right. I think that's going to happen. I think Oakes is going to be around for longer, and I think it's going to happen on Oakes' watch. I know that sounds a little bit ambitious, but I think it's going to happen.
Well, so just a little bit of inside baseball here too. But my father at one point talked to President Oakes specifically about the idea of, well, he talked to him about the fact that he got complaints. My father would get complaints about why don't we have any ethnic diversity in the 12, and had that conversation with Dallin Oakes. And Dallin Oakes said, that's not the role of the 12. He says, but that is the role of the 70. And he says, if you look at the 70, you do see something that represents the ethnic diversity of the church. The number of Latino 70s is very, very large because we have such a large presence. More people are members of the church outside the United States than inside the United States, and a good number of those are in Central and South America. And so that's reflected in the 70. But I think, that was probably 20 years ago that they had that conversation. And since then, we have had our first Asian American apostle. We've had our first Latin American apostle. And the church, the church is now, all of its growth, for the most part, is in Africa. And so that's why I think Elder Dubé makes more sense than an American like Peter Johnson or Ahmed Corbett, because he's an African and he's in the presidency of the 70. And the fact that we have so much growth in Africa would suggest that an African apostle right now makes sense for a whole number of reasons. So it just seems more and more likely to me too. I think Elder Corbett's call is unlikely. His ACT talk drew quite a bit of backlash. Yeah, I think that's probably true. ACT stands for activism. It was actually ATC, not ACT, activism toward the church. I beat up Jacob Hansen with that talk because he kept talking about how it's inappropriate to have any kind of activism toward the church. And Jacob Hansen and others think it's appropriate as long as it's coming from the right and not the left. It's appropriate to tell the church that they can't hire Aaron Sherinian. It's appropriate to tell the church they should be firing BYU people that they don't like because that activism is coming from the right, and so therefore that's acceptable. And I don't think that's acceptable. But that's a whole other discussion. Share, like, and subscribe. Thank you, Latter-day Digest. Yes, please, everybody, share, like, and subscribe. Satati is too old. Is he the other African that's on your list?
Yeah, he's on the list. I don't know how old he is, but okay. Okay.
I would like to hear Ian's thoughts on the Holland Book of Mormon talk. I feel like the work of God versus biggest fraud is not a smart play for the church. We talked about that in the podcast last week, did we not?
I brought it up in the podcast. Again, I've got mixed.
Well, Dim's thoughts too. No, thank you, Clay. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mentioned this on the conversation with Greg Prince and yourself a few days ago. Boy, that was an interesting talk. I think my first take of that talk was, wow, this is the most amazing talk I've ever heard. I mean, I haven't got it in front of me right now, but no matter where, he was basically saying, no matter what your beliefs are, your position is, if you're going to leave the church, you have to crawl underneath, crawl over, the Book of Mormon. You somehow got to get past the Book of Mormon. And I think I could see what he was doing and why he was doing it, but it's a problem. It's a problem for lots of different reasons. And I've not got the talk in front of me right now, and perhaps not as prepared. But the Book of Mormon, I've argued, is not, although it's an inspirational text, and I'm out the church, inside out, and I'm out the church, right? I still feel the Book of Mormon, or parts of the Book of Mormon, is incredibly inspired. It inspires me. I can't deny that. I read it at times. I remember the passages. It's part of my life. I use it as a missionary. The Book of Mormon has been a big part, 35, 37 years part of my life. And it's inspired me often, no end. I found many, many answers in that extraordinary book. But I believe it to be inspired, but fiction, a 19th century text. I don't accept that Moroni or Nephi were literal, were real people. I think it's a bit like Aesop's fables, where you've got these great stories with these characters, with fantastic teachings of inspiration that teach moral principles in a very profound, in a very spiritual way, inspirational way. But that's it. And I think that's the problem with the Book of Mormon, is there's no evidence to support it beyond certain things, and very narrow interpretations of certain things. And so that is the problem. If you set the Book of Mormon up on a pedestal, well, the church has said, that Joseph Smith said, that it's the keystone of the religion. So here's the thing: the keystone is that middle stone piece in the arch. Jim, you remember that? We got taught that when we were young. It's the thing that holds up the arch, if I'm not mistaken, right? And if that fails, if that's crumbling, if that's not put in right or made of the right material, that whole arch can crumble. Well, if you're resting the authenticity of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the divinity, the authenticity of the whole entire basis and theology of Mormonism on the keystone of the religion, on the Book of Mormon, and there are significant questions around that text, then I think you're going to get unstuck. And so I think, and by the way, when he gave the talk and he held up, I think he said he was holding the original Book of Mormon. I think it was the first printed Book of Mormon, I think, historically. He held it up, didn't he, in the talk? It was a book, I think it was the first printed Book of Mormon that was published, if I'm not mistaken. Our listeners, viewers can correct me on that. But I don't think it was the original book. I think it was something else. My memory doesn't serve me well here. But the problem is, if you put all that emphasis and importance on a book that is questionable in terms of its history, I'm not denying it's. You argue it's ancient, right? In the past conversation, you argue that it's ancient. Great.
Well, I argue that the question isn't whether or not the Book of Mormon is fiction. The question is whether or not the Book of Mormon is ancient.
That's right. I remember you saying
there are so many elements of the Bible that are ancient and are also fiction. The Book of Job is fiction.
Right.
There are a number of elements of a lot of the Hebrew Bible are fiction, particularly the earlier parts.
I accept that. In fact, Greg has used the word allegorical, right? So there is elements in the Bible which are true, or some basis of truth, like in the New Testament and perhaps Old Testament. Some of the baselines are in there, right? But there's a lot of it which is, allegorical, right? And it's there, for a reason, and it teaches certain things in a certain way. I think the Book of Mormon's role is to do that. I don't think it's an original text. I think it's incredibly profound. It's definitely inspirational, or at least I find it inspirational. It came about in an extraordinary way, whether it's through the plates or through stone in the hat. I mean, that's another conversation. But I think Holland got a little bit, Clayton's asked me this question. I think Holland's, when you review that talk again, as I did afterwards, and you spend more time thinking about it, I came away with a different feeling. after that as I gave it more. I think I was carried away with the emotion, because my goodness, that was a incredibly emotional talk, if you remember that, very profound. But again, if you look at the content and you kind of strip away some of the emotion, I think Elder Holland, you know, got a little bit carried away on that. I think his musket fire is a problem for him as well. I think he'll be remembered, at least in part, for the musket fire talk. I hope that answers your question, Clayton. It's not comprehensive, but there are a couple of thoughts.
I am of the opinion that the church, I don't think you can get away from an ancient origin for the Book of Mormon. I don't think the church can thread that needle. I know Greg does. I know you do to some degree, although, I mean, you haven't threaded that needle. You decided to separate yourself from the church, which I entirely respect. But the idea that we can get away from the idea that Moroni really was a person, an angel who appeared to Joseph Smith, and that there really were gold plates and that there really were witnesses to those plates, I don't see how the church can run away from that, even if they wanted to.
I agree.
So I mean, but that we've talked about that, and we're actually over an hour, so I want to get through these comments here. Jim Bennett is on my long list. Oh, for apostle, thank you very much. It's not going to happen, but that's very kind of you. If Oaks spent some of those many billions on human welfare, homelessness, etc., then perhaps it would elevate the church slightly, because at the moment it's getting smashed in the press.
Yeah, I agree with that, by the way. The church is doing nowhere near, not even a fraction of what it can do with its incredible resources, not just financial, but its buildings and other resources. It could be doing a lot more. You know, people in America and Canada, around the world, are struggling financially, right? And they're struggling from day to day, from wage slip to wage slip, right? Wondering how they're going to pay the bills. The church holds $300 to $400 billion, the rainy day fund, they call it. You know, what would Christ do if he was in charge of the finances? If he was the presiding bishop, what would Christ do? I could tell you, I put money on this. I mean, that's me gambling there, but I can say that Christ will be doing a lot more with the church resources than what the church is doing. I think this is one of the most important comments that we've heard tonight. I think Oaks, I don't know if he's that kind of man, you know, to invest $1 billion in human welfare, but isn't that the role of the Church of Jesus Christ, to help the most vulnerable, excluded, disadvantaged, the homeless, the hungry, you know, the people who are starving, who have no home, then they don't know where they're going to the next meal, and the church is holding all that money. Morally, it's bankrupt, frankly. Will Oaks do something about that? I don't think so. I think he'll do some great things, but so Peter Higgs, that's a really good comment, Matt. I feel very strongly about that. Go ahead, Jim. What's the next one?
Next one's calling me out. It says, Jim, I think you need to be tolerant of others' perceptions if you would like people to be tolerant of yours. Monica, up yours. Because that's clearly a response to what I've said about Trump, and I have no patience for it. I have no patience for the idea that what happened on January 6, 2021 was not a riot and not an attempt to overthrow the government. Now, I am entirely tolerant of people who have different opinions. I have zero tolerance, and I will continue to have zero tolerance for people who want me to respect their alternative facts. And the kind of crap that I hear about January 6th and the kind of crap that I hear about Donald Trump isn't about policy. It's about reality. It's about the idea that something that actually happened didn't happen. And I have no tolerance for that. And I will continue to have no tolerance for that. And you give me a reminder that I need to be more intolerant of that. So I guess it's a little harsh that I say up yours, but I'm done with it. I am done with acknowledging and respecting alternative reality. I am more than happy to accept and acknowledge and respect people with different opinions. But when you come to me and tell me the sky is green, I'm not going to just agree to disagree. I'm going to stick with objective reality and not apologize for doing so. There, that was harsh. All right. Oaks is his own man from Nelson. Yeah, to some degree. But I think that they really were sort of joined at the hip to some degree. We've got Bednar from my home stake in San Leandro, California. Where's San Leandro? I don't know where that is. Do you know where San Leandro is?
I don't know.
Bruce Butcher has joined the chat. Some of my Dream 15 includes Ian, Jim, Greg Prince, Dan McClellan, Dorf, to name a few.
Am I the prophet?
I'll arm wrestle you for it, except for you probably.
Okay. Yeah, I that would be fun. I don't think you'd recognize the church after a week if I was the prophet.
Yeah, there you go. There are no Bednars in the church.
That's good.
That's a play on Bednar saying there are no homosexuals in the church.
Yeah, I remember that one. Yeah. What did he mean by that? Did he actually? It wasn't literal. What did he mean by that? That was a weird.
Well, it was a really clumsy comment. It did not mean that there are no homosexuals in the church. What he meant is we shouldn't define ourselves by anything but being a child of God. But okay, right. Great. Change is the only permanent aspect of Mormonism. Yes. Happy New Year. Thank you, Latter-day Digest. January 6th was a sign of things to come, which is a worry for not only you guys in the USA, but the rest of us globally as well. No argument from me on that one. It's terrifying now to see Donald Trump is now talking about just taking Greenland. We are not at war with Greenland. Greenland is a territory of Denmark, which is our ally. There is absolutely no justification for us seizing a sovereign nation that has done absolutely. I mean, Venezuela is already pushing it, but Venezuela, we can say, okay, well, we don't like the drug trade, or we don't like, but even Donald Trump isn't saying that. He's saying we just want the oil, which is just repugnant. But if we were to invade Greenland, it would be the end of NATO, which Donald Trump wants. He wants to end NATO. It's terrifying. The geopolitical world in which we're living right now is entirely without any sort of precedent. And it is just so wild to me that what we have normalized. This is the thing, is that it is now acceptable. I mean, January 6th means it's now acceptable to riot when you lose an election. It's also because there was no consequence for it. He was reelected. He pardoned everybody who went to jail, and there was no consequence for it. And it's now acceptable to be found liable for sexual assault and still be president of the United States. You know, I'm naive enough to remember when Republicans were all upset about Monica Lewinsky. Donald Trump was found in a court of law to have raped a woman in a department store in New York City, and nobody cares. And he's convicted of 34 felonies, and nobody cares. He's been found liable for over $500 million worth of fraud. Nobody cares. Just on and on and on. All these things are now normal. All these things are now acceptable. And that was not the case 10 years ago. It is bizarre to me how far we have fallen.
And as I've said earlier, we all have different political positions, Democrat, Republican, whatever, Labour, Conservative. For me, it's about having integrity, being honest, regardless of which party you belong to or not, right? If you're elected into a position, it's being honest, being truthful, having integrity. That is a given, right? I know we're almost out of time here. I do want to share this, Jim, because as I was listening to your reaction earlier about, we hold these positions on politics and religion. We hold, very strong views and opinions on things that mean something to us. And we've got our own personal thoughts and feelings. We're all very different. It's important to have respectful dialogue and have, civility in our conversations. But I want to share this poem. It's cool. It didn't take long. It's a few seconds. And it was quoted by somebody who's not my favorite person, actually. It kind of mixed about this person, Margaret Thatcher. Remember her? She was.
I do.
I think she was prime minister when you and I were serving a missions, right?
I saw her in Scotland while I was a missionary.
Well, there we go. Right, we go.
She was dedicating a shopping center in Dundee, and she her motorcade drove right past us, and I looked her in the eye for a millisecond.
Well, she was elected prime minister, I think, back in 79 and ran 12, 13 years, the Conservative Tory party, right? Wasn't called the Iron Lady. And there was lots of things she did right, in my opinion, and lots of things she got wrong. She introduced the poll tax in Scotland for the first time, and there was riots over that, right? So it was she kind of mixed, depending on who you speak to. She had a meeting with the Queen. You know, she met with the Queen they meet the Queen every week, I think it is. Prime Minister, Queen, you know, figurehead, Prime Minister, just kind of weekly report, I think it is. And the Queen was concerned that Margaret Thatcher was pushing the envelope too far. She was being too radical. And that her policies would cause, and her positions on certain things would cause too much dissension and too much division and generate new enemies for Great Britain. And Thatcher quoted Charles Mackay poem to the Queen, and I want to read it, and I hope our viewers will listen to this, because this is amazing. This is what Margaret Thatcher said to the Queen when the Queen criticized Margaret Thatcher's leadership and some of her policies. Margaret Thatcher said this: "He who has mingled in the fray of duty that the brave endure must have made foes. For if you have none, small is the work that you have done. You hit no traitor on the hip. You've dashed no cup from perjured lip. You've never turned the wrong to right. You've been a coward in the fight." And I love that. Absolutely love that. And I think as long as we focused on integrity and honesty and doing the right thing, and we feel strongly about something politically or religiously, then that's okay. And as long as we are respectful and kind and courteous in our conversations, and I know religion and politics are the most emotive topics. You don't get more emotion triggered reactions than talking about religion and politics. Here we are talking about religion and politics. But yeah, sometimes we've got to stand up and be counted. And so when you and I were preparing for this briefly for this conversation, we're out of time here. I was saying that my hopes and expectations on the church going forward under President Oakes and his successors is that the church will step up and be the organization that I thought it was, frankly, and then I still hoped it will be. If you look at around all the world, right, are we not in desperate need of organizations, either in the corporate world or in the political world and the religious world, for organizations to act collectively and uniformly on doing the right thing, to show true moral leadership, to be bold, to be courageous, to do the right thing, to say the right thing, and to take a stand on certain things, no matter what, like what this Charles Mackay poem says, right? To turn a wrong to right. And even though I'm not in the church, I still hold out that the leadership of the church on these key issues affecting us, across the world, locally, regionally, globally, these big issues that are affecting us across the globe, that the church leadership and its moral leadership and its unique, distinct position as being the only true church upon the face of the earth, with this direct line to God, the mouthpiece of God. Imagine that just for a second, being able to have that authority and that moral relationship and that spiritual connection with God, where you know the will and mind of God. This is what the church claims. Surely that claim brings significant responsibility, especially now in a world that's so divided. We need strong leadership from the church, better than we have, better leadership. And I'm hoping Dallin H. Oakes, who I've had the privilege of meeting, and him and I got along. I like him. I know he's got mixed with different people, but him and I clicked. My personal experience with him was positive. I'm hoping that on these key issues, Oakes and the leadership will take a position and have the courage to do that in 2026 and beyond. I know we're way over time here, but they're some of my closing thoughts.
All right, let's just go quickly here. You go, Jim. Up there's indeed. As you were talking and as you're reading that poem, Ian, I thought, have you ever heard of something called the paradox of tolerance?
No, I haven't.
The idea is, so a lot of people, I remember last time I raised this was online. The church had posted a news article talking about how they had opened up some chapels for a Muslim worship service. And I don't remember, I don't think it was in the United States, but it was a really generous, gracious thing. And a lot of members lost their minds. They went in there and they commented and just said awful things, and how dare you allow this religion of Satan to come into our churches, and blah, 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 and oh, da, 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 da. And I pushed back, and then somebody said to me, Jim, you're beating up on members who are struggling. You need to be tolerant of them. And my reaction was very much like my reaction was a few minutes ago. The paradox of tolerance is, if you are tolerant of the intolerant, then tolerance itself disappears. The minute you say bigotry is acceptable, agree to disagree about racism, agree to disagree about fascism, agree to disagree about things where there really isn't another side to the story. If you're tolerant of racism, then eventually everybody becomes a racist. Eventually racism is acceptable. You have to stand up against the intolerant. And again, I want to point out that, if you believe differently than I do, if you worship differently than I do, if you vote differently than I do, good for you. I've got no problem with any of that. If you are, you want me to tolerate your bigotry, you want me to tolerate dishonesty and lies, if you want me to believe something that isn't true and is demonstrably untrue, I'm not going to have any tolerance for that. I'm not going to say, your facts are just as good as my facts. I'm not going to do that, because the paradox of intolerance means that we go down the direction that the country is going down, which is that reality, objective reality, is no longer compelling to a large segment of society. The amount of people that look at January 6th and say it wasn't a riot, or it was instigated by Nancy Pelosi, or it was, it's nonsense. It's just simply not true. It has nothing to do with your political ideology. None of my opposition to Donald Trump has anything to do with political ideology, because Donald Trump's ideology is incoherent. He doesn't have any. He goes back, forth, up, down, sideways. It used to be the Republican Party, when I was a Republican, believed free trade and free markets were the heart of democracy. And now Republicans hate free trade and free markets. And tariffs, Ronald Reagan railed on tariffs, and Donald Trump wanted to sue the company that posted a legitimate video of Ronald Reagan railing on tariffs, because he said Reagan loved tariffs. No, he didn't. Whether or not you like that he didn't is another story, but you can't just say he loved them when he didn't. You can't invent reality and expect me to go along with it. So that, again, all right. If it goes any further, the only missions young LDS men will be going on is military ones. I remember when misspelling potato was disqualifying for the presidency. That was the vice presidency. But yeah, the amount of scrutiny that presidents and vice presidents got back in the day compared to Donald Trump. It's very clear from the Epstein stuff, this guy is probably a pedophile, and we don't care. Evening, y'all. A little late, but I'm here. Well, glad you're here. We're about to sign off, dude. Don't forget to upload the episode to expand the viewership. Got to touch the algorithm. Did we not upload this episode? This is going to be on YouTube. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if it means, should we upload it as a podcast, an audio podcast too?
Oh, maybe good. Thank you, Guy. Yeah.
Instigated by Nancy, done by Antifa, inside dem job, all pardoned by Trump. I hope you don't mean what I think you mean. I think it's tongue in cheek. With that, thank you all very much. This has been delightful, Ian. I hope you've been having a good time, because I have had a lovely time here.
Yeah,
So,
it's been fantastic. We're grateful. Just before we close here, you and I had a meeting earlier about the review of the podcast, how it's done, what we've achieved, the content, the guest that's been on. To our viewers and listeners, we invite and welcome constructive criticism, constructive feedback, and any ideas that you have to improve the podcast, improve the conversation. We want you to get as much from this as we do, and also any ideas in terms of topics and content going forward, any guests that you think that we should be thinking about. So we really value and welcome and invite your ideas and thoughts and suggestions for 2026.
yeah, Jack Carter wants us to do Collins again. I think we can do that.
Yeah.
Wonderful discussion. Glad to be part. It was cheeky. Oh,
cheeky, tongue in cheek. Yeah.
Because the pardon by Trump was like, okay, that was a sign that it was tongue in cheek.
There we go. I think because you were quite emotional and passionate there, you probably may not seen that. Yeah, but
may not have found that. All right. So thank you all very much, and we'll see you this weekend. Our next episode of Inside Out.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Everybody.